Yep. Ashleigh, I'm from the Premier's Implementation Unit in the Department of Premier and Cabinet.
Tim Ruge from Coffs Harbour City Council. I'm working there in our local strategic planning section, partly working on developing a transport strategy, so with New South Wales, Transport for New South Wales.
Great. Thank you for joining us. We've had some interesting insights today around policy and procedure, but we're going to have a fireside chat now around the difficult, sharp end of the equation, the actual delivery. So jumping straight into examples that you've had, prior experience where you've delivered some projects, tell me a little bit about, and don't be shy, we're all friends here. Tell me a little bit about a prior project where you've worked with people where you had a really significant barrier. What was that barrier to delivery, and how did you overcome it?
I guess one of our big problems is just getting that internal culture change with design of our streets, not at such an over-engineering approach or car-centric approach, and we have a broader approach. So one example was we got this big regional sports funding grant. It was about connecting to a big sports precinct with the university area and the sporting facilities there. It's divided by a big arterial road, and another main road with a big two-lane roundabout, I guess, in the middle. And that was the key connection we wanted to achieve, to connect these two sides. There was also a regional cycle route on one side, which you could never get across back from that side to the sports facilities. So I guess the first thing we did was employed a urban design consultant rather than just an engineering consultant to come up with an overall bicycle pedestrian network. So rather than thinking about the constraints, they thought about the broader vision, what we want to achieve, and not getting bogged down in the details. Then when we got to the detail design, that's when it sort of hit a bit of a barrier where, well, this can't get across a two-lane roundabout. We can't have I'll step back. I guess the ultimate vision was to have signalised crossing there down the track, but we didn't have the funds for that, so let's get a refuge in. It's not the ideal, but it's better than nothing. That didn't quite, the thought was they won't tick RMS's or traffic committees, criteria. We can't do it, so the option was let's just walk away. But luckily, internally, the bosses were really push the boundaries. So we then utilise, I don't know if many people know about the safe systems approach in Australia. Tried to adopt that, so we were in an internal training session for all our engineers. Then we also got a consultant to do an assessment on that roundabout, the existing scenario and the master plan scenario, and that showed, yes, it can be done, it's a better outcome. And in that way, we got buy-in, I guess, from the engineers.
So a bit of compromise, I guess, was sort of what delivered an outcome in the end. Yeah,
compromise, a bit of internal training, I guess, and an external sort of input, so they didn't feel it's just their own. I guess they didn't feel too exposed from a risk point of view if they had external experts telling them, yes, this is okay. So.
Ashleigh, Sarah, did you want to speak to that point at all? Because if not, I have a question for Lucy. Lucy, it's interesting talking about compromise and different stakeholders and getting people sort of over the line. I remember you and I, when we were going around the traps in London, we used to frequently bump into, and I'm going to put this politely, pretty recalcitrant senior civil servants, public servants, who would swear blue that what was being proposed could not be done. And then suddenly, as you identified this morning, there was incredible leadership right at the top of the organisation, from the chairman, from the mayor. And then there was a lot of money to be spent, and also personal money in terms of people's scorecards and KPIs. My experience was that suddenly the people who said no learnt to bend in the breeze and say yes. How important do you think that was in terms of being able to achieve and deliver the stuff that's been done?
So something that I learnt was that large bureaucratic organisations are basically intrinsically designed to keep things exactly the same as they are now. And so that it's not that the individuals in that organisation particularly feel a strong sense that things should stay as they are, but all the systems that are there keep everything exactly as it is now. And so the change that happens is that in that context in particular, it doesn't come from within the organisation, because the organisation is not set up to innovate and to disseminate change. It's set up to keep everything exactly the same and manage risk. So that doesn't engender innovation. The only way that can happen is if someone above that organisation basically forces it upon the bureaucracy. And that is my experience in London, was that the change didn't come from within the Transport Authority. The mayor said, I want you to do things differently. And because it's set up to respond to what the mayor asks for, it fell in line. So those people who were saying no because the person above them was saying no. But as soon as they were told to start saying yes, they started saying yes. But that was a useful thing for me to learn, because I spent so much more time trying to change inside an organisation that couldn't change. And looking back, if I could have done my time differently, I could have saved myself a lot of hard working hours and just talked more to politicians, and I probably would have got there a lot quicker. So that was a learning point for me.
Ashleigh, I want to... You look like you had a comment to jump in.
Working on the Premier's priorities, and some of you may have been when the Premier spoke recently about them to the public sector, and she spoke about doing things differently and thinking differently. And in my experience, when we start to be a bit disruptive and ask people to think differently, you're exactly right. They sort of go, no, I can't, I don't feel comfortable with that. And adding to what you've said, one of the things we've found is sort of persistently just being there, day in, day out, continuing to ask the questions, not try and be super annoying and not go away, but just always be there, but being supportive and continuing to push the agenda.
Yeah, it's key. It's key. Something that's come up continuously as a theme today around discussion are all those different levels of stakeholder engagement, conversations, whether they're internal or whether they're with that angry person who lives down the road who always writes to your local politician. Talk to me about stakeholder engagement. How have you balanced resistance versus progress? How have you balanced the noisy mailbag versus what's actually going on? Group engagement or key one-to-one relationships? Any tips around engagement?
I could sort of say, I guess when I was at Waverley Council and we did a sort of our strategic transport plan, it was a combination of both. It was both taking that internally within the council and making sure we engaged right across the whole organisation internally first, and then we went out to public consultation, was to give the public, I guess, asking about their aspirations. So not sort of concentrating on, what parts are you going to lose? We're going to take away your parking. What do you think? Because that puts people into a risk-averse thinking of a lot of aversion to loss, which we know is people will always be upset about. We put it much more out as, what are your hopes and aspirations? What would you like as your lifestyle? How can we help to live that as part of your sort of transport day? And unsurprisingly, people came back and said, actually, what we really want are cycleways and footpaths. So that was I guess it's often how we engage and how we take our stakeholders on for that journey as well.
Actually, I was just going to say too, I guess we've sort of approached it initially with our transport strategy on a broader scale. One, we've run some internal workshops, one with Transport for New South Wales, a visioning type workshop to get internal buy-in. And then we've all engaged Stephen Burgess from Complete Streets. I don't know if people have heard him talk, fairly charismatic character. So we've used him to really sell the message to our councillors, to get buy-in from them, just, what it could be, how this could make it a great city, really appeal to, I guess, their points. And also the local Chamber of Commerce, just really selling the economic benefits of better street design. Just more walkability means more people spending in your town centre, etc., etc. So trying to get the focus away about parking and just more more vibrant streets. And also, I guess this probably applies to a lot of regional cities, trying to attract the millennials back here, back to our city, sort of rather than sort of going off to Sydney, Melbourne, etc. after they've finished school or whatever to go to uni and so on. Trying to bring them back and bring that sort of economic vitality associated with them back to our place via better street design. So,
yeah, interesting. So urban design as a marketing tool. Yeah, interesting. I'm really interested in, Lucy, what you were talking this morning around data, how the data that captures people's essence of place and experience of place. I'd love for you to tell me some insights from that. And Ashleigh, I'd love for you to tell me, how useful do you think that stuff would be around the conversations you have which go up the chain?
So something that I find I have to keep reminding my colleagues in the transport sector is that so I'm a health professional, and I'm a health professional because I'm really comfortable with the concept of my own mortality, and I'm really interested in diseases. But I can understand that not everybody else feels that way, and I start the sentence like that to then break it gently to my transport colleagues that the vast majority of people are not the least bit interested in transport in and of itself, which is a tough sell in the organisation that I was working. Trying to explain that a bus is not intrinsically interesting to people is quite difficult, but we have money that is given for a transport project, and then transport professionals go out to talk to the community about that project, and of course everything's framed in terms of transport. And so with Healthy Streets, I've been really trying to pull us away from that, and instead going out into the community and saying to people, what are the challenges that you're facing right now? And then working out how the thing that we were kind of planning on doing anyway is going to fix their problem, because what we're planning on doing is improving livability, so it will help with their problem. But to give you an example, we have these pots of money that are spent on what are called livable neighbourhoods. I don't really like the term because I think livable is such a low bar to set. It's like saying, come to my wonderful restaurant, we have edible food here. But we have these livable neighbourhoods, and the usual approach would be to go out and start surveying people, asking them how they travel and where they need the parking spaces. Instead, they went out to the businesses in this livable neighbourhood and said, what are your main challenges as a business owner? And the issues they were coming up with were completely unrelated to transport, seemingly, and no one would have thought of them. It was that they had people coming in their shops stealing stuff a lot, and because there was only one person working in the shop, they had to choose between letting people steal things from their struggling shop or on their own confronting someone who was stealing stuff from their shop. That was the problem that they were dealing with. That's what they wanted some help with. So going in there and talking about moving loading bays was just giving them a new problem. It wasn't actually dealing with their problem. So starting out by collecting a lot of information in very general surveys that don't frame anything around transport to find out what people's problems are, and then work out how to frame what's being proposed in terms of how it will help them with their problem, which is we're going to increase footfall on this street, and it's going to change the clientele who are walking around on this street, and it's going to reduce that kind of low-level petty crime that you're experiencing. So community data framed not in terms of transport or movement has been really useful in landing those projects much more successfully.
Fantastic. Ashleigh, we've heard data, we've heard stakeholder engagement, we've heard about some of the policy. Which one is key for you, and what can we do to help?
In a way, they're all key in many ways. A lot of the PRU kind of works around 4 domains. So it's about, what does the data say? Thinking about that quantitative data. But we can sit up in an office and look at quantitative data, but, we need to get out on the ground and go, okay, what are the people saying? What are the service providers saying? What are the kids saying? What are the teachers saying about what we do? So then you've got to triangulate, frontline perspective with what you're getting from the data. And then the next pillar we really think about is focused action. So then what are kind of the really, the things that we should be doing? We've looked at the data, we've done field work. And when I speak about field work in terms of understanding citizen perspective, frontline perspective, it's also thinking about perspective from, we call it the delivery chain. So right from the front line and from consumers, understanding who are all the key people right to the Premier involved in supporting delivery of this service, and speaking essentially to all the key people on that delivery chain to understand what are what are the blockages in the system, what's working really well, and how do we start to then communicate across government and across sectors about what's happening. And the fourth arm is really around, routines. So continuing to have a conversation with the Premier and the Premier's office, continuing to have routines, regular ways of working with everyone to ensure we keep on track. So I don't know if that answered it, but yeah.
No, that's great. That's great. So let's summarise. Let's imagine that we are here in a year to 18 months' time. You've got a Twitter pitch for me. A Twitter pitch, if you're not familiar with, if you use Twitter, you can only communicate in about 140 characters. So very succinctly, what would you do or what would you like, or what do you need to achieve some of the aims that we've raised today? And I'm going to start with Sara, because she's staring at me like she's ready to go.
What am I going to break down to it? What are you going to break down to the 140 characters?
Yeah, as in what talking about all of the things that we'd like to achieve, which we've talked about today. What are the key things that you absolutely need to make your life easier?
I feel a little bit put on the spot here. I think what would be great is, as I sort of mentioned in my presentation, we've got all these various government policies out there that have set 18 months ago, this is where we'd like to get to by 2056. And I think one of the things that people struggle with is, well, that's a pretty long time away. We don't really need to change what we're doing now, because that's such a long time away. Somebody else is going to take care of that. The council's going to take care of that, etc. And I guess what would be really great is thinking about how we do not just break down the silos, how we actually have a truly cross-government, inter-government, working with stakeholders approach to changing the business as usual. Because I think what we've seen out of today is that if we keep doing business as usual or just making slight tweaks, we're just not going to get there. And I guess that's what would be great, to try and break that nexus. I don't think that's a 12-month project, but we can get on that pathway.
Great. Tim?
I'm thinking, I guess, one, we need an internal culture change at council, that, street design is not just an engineering exercise, it's an urban design exercise. It involves a lot of disciplines. Another one is, how do we apply a lot of these theories, or apply it to a regional city context where we haven't got the densities you have in the cities? I guess their money's spread a bit thin. We're very, I'd have to say it's pleasant to drive a car. So it's not, we haven't got that sort of push to, to go to other forms of transport. So how do we get that squeeze, I guess, on the car use to push to other modes and more active modes? Yeah, and I guess money, how do we get that?
Picking up on Sarah's point, really that true meaningful partnership, not only across government but across the private sector, NGO and private, with the citizen at the centre of that. I was really struck when I was working on the childhood overweight and obesity priority, and we were looking at the data, and with the work that New South Wales Health was doing, we might get 3% of the way there, but we've got to do more. There's got to be more work across government. There's an opportunity in the active travel space to do that. And we brought people together in a forum across government, and the collective kind of willingness and passion in the room was all there. There's a lot of people in New South Wales that really want to work in this space and do it well. And I'm not sure how we do that, but I was really struck by how awesome, the people were, the intelligence and wanting to do something right. But the structures we operate in do make it really difficult.
So often when we're talking about streets, the thing that each of us in this room have in mind is the notion that a street is going to be completely stripped out, building line to building line, and rebuilt in a new model, in a new way, and it's going to look lovely. And that, even if you have loads of money, is going to happen on a tiny fraction of streets over the coming years. And so for me, a really key important part of this is the things that you do in the interim, much more widespread, that indicate to people your intentions, your priorities, what you think is important. In London, and this may be familiar or not, I'll be able to tell from whether your heads nod or not when I describe this situation, but if we have a building being constructed or we've got roadworks going on, what happens is the carriageway lanes for the cars stay exactly the same. The bit where the people were walking, that gets covered in other stuff. It becomes a useful dumping ground, and they're flung out into the carriageway, often with no ramp or anything, or just expected to evaporate, like footway stops here, use the other side, those kinds of signs. And it's a very clear message to everyone, whether they're driving through or whether they're standing there stranded on the street, that they are right at the bottom in terms of no one could care less about them, quite frankly. No one's thought about you and no one cares about you. And one of the tools that we developed in London is a roadwork management tool, and it's instructions for the people who are making construction on streets or who are managing a building site on a street on how they have to stop and think about how they're going to prioritise people walking and cycling through that street and how they're going to reroute cars, which is a mind-blowing idea for them because they've never had to do it before. But then we also have someone whose job is to go around and police them and make sure they actually do what they're meant to do. It builds a change in culture, and it's quite widespread across the whole city. So while we get on with the long, painful job of trying to redesign the streets, we have some ways of indicating to people the change in thinking that we're trying to spread more widely.
Fantastic. Fantastic. That's all the time we have for our panel discussion, but let's give them a very big thank you, and thank you very much for your input.